Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with another weekly reading vlog. I'm not really sure if this will go a week. I'm not really sure how long it'll last because I'm actually starting this on a Wednesday. It's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I fully intended to start this vlog at least a couple of days earlier, but time just completely got away from me, and Monday and Tuesday of this week were actually very hectic. Normally the week of Thanksgiving is very low-key and you have a lot of time on your hands, but actually not this year. So I haven't actually been home in the evenings the last couple of nights, so I just decided I would go on and start the vlog tonight. As always, we're doing very non-traditional Thanksgiving this year, and Thanksgiving is going to be a small affair. So basically what we are doing is just kind of an assortment of appetizers. We're basically going to make a meal out of appetizers. And so I am making like Brussels sprout chips. I feel like Brussels sprouts are a big thing at American Thanksgiving, but we really never had them that I can remember when I was growing up. I can't really remember ever having them as a kid or seeing them around, but I am going to slice them really thinly and roast them with some cheese. And they are supposed to come out very crunchy and crispy like a chip. And I am also doing salami cups, where you cook a piece of salami in a muffin tin and it makes it a little cup that can hold salad. I'm really making those just because I thought that would look pretty, but I think we're gonna have an assortment of other appetizers. We are 100% not traditional American Thanksgiving people. So I'm really excited about this. I think it'll be fun and I think it'll be different. And so after Thanksgiving, of course, it will be time to get out the Christmas stuff. I think in my last vlog, you saw that I took down the fall stuff in here anyway, but I did actually go to Hobby Lobby and I picked up some Christmas stuff for in here, but we still have the trees to put up and basically just in general, all of the big Christmas items to get out. So that's probably also going to be achieved in this vlog, which does make me skeptical of the amount of reading that will get done. I always think every year, oh gee, at Thanksgiving, we have so many days off. I'm gonna get to read like 2 or 3 books. I'm gonna get to do all this crafting. None of it's ever achieved. I mean, not a bit of it. It feels like it's actually not a very relaxing weekend all told, because you have to do all this cooking, you have to get together with people, then you have to get all of your Christmas stuff out. And for us, that's kind of a journey and that's kind of a lot. So that is on the agenda. Hopefully I can carry you along for the ride tomorrow, but I am currently in the middle of 2 books. One of these is Juniper and Thorn, which is by Reid. And Reid is an author that I have hated one book from and I have now loved one book from. And I felt like it was time to come back to Juniper and Thorn because it seems like everyone agrees this is her best book. Now, I don't know so far if I'm going to agree with that. Apparently, this is very dark, it's very heavy, and it's very gory. And this is a retelling of the Juniper Tree fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. So I'm kind of excited about this. I don't know that I've ever seen that retold. And if you want to know the honest truth, that's an incredibly dark fairy tale. So I would expect a retelling to be very, very, very dark. So I'm looking forward to getting into this one. And I think this will cement for me whether I can call Reid a new favorite author or not. It's interesting. The book that I hated from her, though, was an adult release. And the book that I loved from her was young adult. So I'm curious, given that this book is adult, but I've heard mostly positive things about it. I'm kind of curious to see how I'll fall on that. I don't know if I prefer her writing kind of in the young adult sector. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I'm really excited about it. I have finished some absolutely banging books lately. So I'm hoping that I can kind of keep my streak up and continue to read some really fantastic things. So I feel good about this so far. I'm maybe 10% of the way in, so I don't have a lot of thoughts yet. The other book that I'm reading is The Princess in the Tower by Philippa Langley. And this is a book that I pre-ordered. It came out last Friday. I'm a good 10% of the way into this one, and I feel like I'm actually at a point to offer some feelings. So The Princess in the Tower is a book that I frankly knew nothing about until a couple of weeks ago, because I was doing a Richard III recommendations video, and when I was just looking her up, I kind of wondered what she was currently doing. I found out that this book was coming out, and I thought, I'm just like a member of the Richard III Society on multiple different social media platforms. I follow them everywhere, and I cannot believe I somehow missed the release date of this book. But this is what Philippa Langley moved on to after the rediscovery of Richard's body. So Philippa Langley was responsible for basically the rediscovery of Richard III. And so they asked her at the reinterment of his body, what's your next step? And she even said, I think the next step is we got to clear his name and we have to solve the mystery of the princes in the tower. So that's what this book is. She's found new evidence that apparently claims these boys never died, and they certainly outlived Richard's reign. So we can just say he's completely innocent. I am interested to see what these documents are. I'm very skeptical right now. I actually really truly am. Though the introduction got me really excited, really got me going, because I thought, she's done it. She has actually completely rehabilitated his image, and she has proved his innocence, and I can't believe it. But if anybody can do it, Philippa Langley can. But now I feel like I have a little bit more context for what she has found, and she found it on the continent, specifically in the Low Countries, which I think makes sense. I'm figuring she found this in the area that used to be Burgundy. The book is structured in an interesting way. She has structured this book a bit like a police procedural, like we're looking into a missing persons case and we're going to figure out who did it. And so I think that's fun, and that means that this is very interesting. It's also very dense. I want to say, if you're not like obsessed with Richard III or with the time period, I feel like she drops you in at the deep end, but I feel like at this point in her career, and also just in general in terms of people who are going to pick up her books, I think you know what she's about, first of all, but you also know quite a bit about the time period, so she doesn't really need to open you up to too much. Now, she has given some kind of larger background about the Wars of the Roses, but this book has mainly been about the boys. It's been about the princes, which I think is interesting, and I'm actually really proud of her that the whole book has not really been Richard focused. There is a program coming on tonight, I think it is, that's coming out on PBS, and I have not yet watched it, but apparently she is going to talk at length about this new information that she has found. The interesting thing is that I have heard a lot of talk about her so-called discoveries in the past week since the book was released, and a lot of people have remained skeptical, but a lot of people, particularly those who like Richard and people who were in the Richard III Society, have immediately agreed with her and said, well, of course he's innocent, and it feels great to be able to say that you've cleared his name. I'm guessing nothing definitive like that is actually offered in the text. So I am interested to get to the part where she introduces what she has found, but I think it's really interesting. I want to believe Richard didn't do it. And so I'm guessing her main argument is that one of the pretenders to the throne that came about during Henry VII's reign, Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, they each claimed to be one of the princes in the tower. And really, because the bodies were never produced, people can't say they aren't. So Lambert Simnel doesn't get that far, but Perkin Warbeck rises very high very quickly, and he convinces a lot of people that he is who he says he is, a lot of very powerful people. He has the backing of a lot of really powerful individuals, and he also marries incredibly well. And so my guess is she's kind of betting on the horse that Perkin Warbeck was Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the princes in the tower. If you know nothing about this, it's really a crazy story, and I suggest you look it up. But basically, Richard III was the king from 1483 to 1485, and his two nephews are technically in line before him. So when his older brother dies, his oldest son inherits and becomes Edward V, let's say. The younger son is Richard, Duke of York. Well, they are declared illegitimate. Richard III supposedly finds something that says that Edward IV was married previously. So these kids are the result of an illegitimate marriage, and a marriage we can't even take seriously, so there's no way they can be in the line of succession. Basically, after that comes about, he becomes the king. Well, at some point during his reign, nobody hears anything from these princes anymore, and it's kind of assumed he killed them, or that somebody had them killed. Most people don't think they survived. Now, I know that Philippa Langley has thought for years and years there is no way they died, and so I was interested to read a book from her perspective, because in some ways, some of those theories are a little bit crackpot to me. That's certainly something that plays very well in fiction, and I love in historical fiction. There is just something about it. It's really compelling to me in historical fiction, but I don't know how you can say it with any kind of certainty in terms of historical reality. So I am interested to see her perspective, but my guess is people pretended to be these princes in the reign of the king after Richard III, Henry VII. And so my guess is Philippa Langley believes these guys were real. Now, I just don't see how you can say Lambert Simnel was actually one of them, because Lambert Simnel did not get very far at all. Perkin Warbeck, he's an interesting story. He's an interesting dude in his own right. So I'm excited. I'm back in my Richard era. I think that's going to be the main book that I focus on because it's kind of the end of nonfiction November and I want to finish at least a couple more nonfictions. I'm also reading another nonfiction that is really, really interesting, but is incredibly slow going. So I don't actually think that I will get it done by the end of the month and possibly not by the end of the year. But I actually am also reading a physical book. Why am I reading 7 different things? Please don't ask me. I really don't know. But I am also currently reading Letters to Milena by Franz Kafka, and I am on page 30, I guess. Not very far. Obsessed. I mean, literally obsessed with him, in love with him a little bit. Just kind of nursing a crush right now because, oh my gosh. I looked up a picture of him. I said, I know this man was hot. You know, there's just an energy to him. The photographs didn't do much for me. But then as I'm reading the letters, I've gone back to his photographs. I said, he's suddenly becoming more attractive to me. So that's frankly the power of personality. I am obsessed with him. This is a collection of letters that he wrote to a woman who he had a love affair with. And she was his translator. So Milena translated his works that were originally written in German. She translated them into Czech. None of her letters to him survive. So that's the sad thing. You're only reading one piece of the puzzle here, and you're kind of trying to read between the lines because he starts in like kind of hot and heavy right off the bat. And I'm thinking, I know this girl was chafing, you know? I know she was feeling like, dude, do you even know me? But I actually don't know. I don't know if she conveyed a lot of detail to him in the early letters that he is referring back to, if there was earlier correspondence that's not included here, but they basically conducted this entire affair through letters. They met only twice, which is kind of crazy to me, and they are already like sickeningly romantic. I just love his mind. I just am fascinated by him. Honestly. And in fact, I'm really so much more fascinated by him than I am by any of his work. I don't find myself pulled to much of his fiction. This is incredible to me. And so I automatically picked up his diaries. I know. Who would have guessed? Me simping for another German writer? It is what it is. I know he was Czech, but he wrote in German. And apparently he spoke mostly German. And his Czech wasn't that great. Because he's telling her, why don't you write to me in Czech? I can understand it. I'm not as great at it written. So it's interesting. I'd like more context for why he kind of shifted into German. I know that that was a big thing at the time in kind of the area of what used to be Bohemia. They were taught to read and write in German rather than in Czech. And Czech was like a language you used at home. German was kind of the language of business because when Kafka was born anyway, I'm sure it was still the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So German would have been a more homogenous language to the area, which is really interesting. I love this time period, frankly. And anyway, I'm obsessed with him. Well, I'm going to let you go because I'm getting ready to head out the door. I'm getting ready to see the new Hunger Games movie. When I get home, am I going to reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy and prequel? You know, I just wouldn't put it past me. I apparently can't commit to anything. I'm apparently at a time in my life where I'm reading at least 6 different books, and that always conveys to me just a sense of chaos and anxiety in my regular life. And so I definitely am feeling that these days, but I will check in with you tomorrow. I'll tell you how the movie is. I'm sure you want to know. And I will cook with y'all a little bit, hopefully. Good morning. We are getting started here. These are going to be little croque monsieurs. That's what my mom is going to bring. And this half of the puff pastry we're saving, and we're making some kind of palmier, and that sounds really, really good. And what you're hearing cooking are the caramelized onions. So these are going to go into some little stuffed potatoes, which also sounds really good. But the oven is not on yet. This is the new oven that I told y'all about. Isn't it pretty? So when this is on, I'm going to put the salami in, and then I'll cook the Brussels sprouts, but we're not eating till 3, so I want the Brussels sprouts to be the last thing. Something's beeping. was fantastic. And as always, the Hunger Games films, I think, are actually just really great adaptations of the book. I really do think this is one of the few occasions where I can say an adaptation actually gets to not just the heart of the story, of the original story, but it also really just truly does adapt the events as they happened in the book, which I think is what most people are looking for. The cast did a really great job. Is it as good as the original trilogy? No, but the prequel book was also not as good as the original trilogy of books. So I just really liked it. And one thing that I really, really loved was the attention to detail in terms of disability representation, especially in terms of the tributes this time around, because that's something that was missing from the original film trilogy to me. Katniss, for example, had lost hearing in an ear, and Peeta actually had to have a prosthetic leg because of something that happened in the first Hunger Games, which then made it difficult for him in Catching Fire. So those were elements that I thought were missing from the trilogy that really added something to it. And so I was really excited to see that done here. All in all, it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. And I would watch 15 more Hunger Games movies. But we just got home from Thanksgiving. I am super full. Everything was really, really delicious. So I'm going to settle in and possibly just watch some TV, read a little. I would really like to get some reading done, but I'm kind of exhausted. An update on reading, though. In The Princess in the Tower, I have learned a couple of things that I think are really interesting. The first of these is actually something that deeply upsets me, and it's the fact that there's actually a very high percentage that Richard was blonde. And I feel like I probably knew this given that the rest of his family is always described as blonde, his brothers in particular, but Richard has such brunette energy. Like, I just don't accept that he was a blonde. And they even said specifically he had the type of blonde hair that darkens as you get older, which I think is really interesting, that because they found his skeleton, they've been able to kind of trace all of this stuff. So that's really interesting. But I also learned that he had a certain role kind of as protector of the realm, I think, where he was entitled to do certain things. And so there was an execution that happened right before Richard became the king that has always been very contentious. This is the execution of William Lord Hastings, who was Edward IV's best friend. And actually, he is a guy who really stood up for Richard against the Queen and her family. And so it's always been strange. His execution, there was a meeting of the council. Richard says at this meeting, "You've been threatening my life. There was a plot against me," and Hastings is executed. And it's always been portrayed as something that was a little bit beyond the pale and that there was actually no political explanation of. And in this book, I actually didn't know some of the duties and the roles that he had as protector. And all of that shows that he was within his rights to have him executed, but also to have him investigated, period, and prove that there was a plot ongoing. And so I thought that was really interesting. I actually have learned quite a bit just about context for some of the events of this time period, and maybe I just haven't read anything about it in a long time, so all of this is seeming like it's brand new information, but it's really not. But I am really thoroughly enjoying it, but it was a nice Thanksgiving, so I am looking forward to settling in and relaxing. I realize the angle, the lighting, my hair, none of it's doing anything for me, the fact that I don't have my contacts in. But I just thought I would go on and update you because it's been a couple of days. It's now Saturday. Yesterday, essentially, we spent the entire day getting up the Christmas tree, the big Christmas tree, and that's fully up and it's fully decorated, so that is a big success. But then we had to get up the smaller Christmas tree today, which has not been decorated. So not a lot of reading has gotten done. You are once again on this shaky tripod. I am going to throw this thing away when I finish this clip, literally. The main thing that I had to update on is that I am now about halfway through Juniper and Thorn. I'm gonna be real. I'm enjoying this, not to the same degree though, as A Study in Drowning at all, but I'm still really enjoying this. It is so interesting when you read a book that you really, really hate and you think it's totally going to turn you against the author, and then you decide to take a chance again, and wow, you were actually wrong about them. That is so rare for me. So this is definitely a case where I really feel far more positively towards this author than I ever thought that I would. But Juniper and Thorn is not hitting me in the same way as A Study in Drowning. There was something about that. But Juniper and Thorn is a fairy tale retelling, and I think I've often just heard that. What I am going to tell you is that this book is a horror book, and I think ignoring the horror elements possibly makes you feel like this book has been mismarketed. And I don't necessarily think that it has. Clearly, when you go on Goodreads, a lot of people have it shelved as horror. And there are just so many like outright gross moments that to me, I thought were just kind of there to be provocative. And then when I was reading up on it and when I was putting on Goodreads that I was currently reading this, I realized that a lot of people shelved this as horror. And once I kind of understood the book through that lens, to me, none of this stuff was out of place anymore. It is very graphic. There are a lot of trigger warnings for this book, so please look them up before you get into it. But easily one of the most ideal books to be reading as we get ready to transition into winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's set in a Russian-inspired world, which is nearly always a buzzword for me. And there is something about this that very specifically reminds me of Deathless by Catherine M. Valente, which is one of my favorite books, honestly. I think about the fact that Deathless had such an incredibly well-constructed sense of aesthetic and of world. It is certainly a book that doesn't work for everybody. And really, objectively, I don't even know that I rated this book 5 stars, but it is a book that I consistently think about and that I constantly compare other books to, which I think means this should probably be considered a favorite, but this is kind of hitting for me in the same way. Deathless also strayed just a tiny bit into the realm of horror, and I personally really, really liked that. So I am really loving what this book is doing. To me, the discussions that were ongoing in A Study in Drowning, they were really interesting. The thematic content of A Study in Drowning was absolutely brilliant to me. And here, I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's our theme? What are we going for? Are we just kind of talking about hardship and abuse? And so I am curious to know just where this book is going in terms of conversation, but there are definitely some plot elements that aren't that well done here. Like, this is supposedly building into like a murder mystery. There's something going on where this monster is in town, and this is on the back of the book. This is listed on the back of the tin, as it were. And so I've kind of been waiting for this element to show up, and to me, it's easily the least well done element, and it's also the element we don't need. There's a romance here that I really like. The side characters are really interesting. I'm fascinated in some ways by the world, which is interesting because the book that I hated from Ava Reid was also set in this world. So I'm just really pleasantly surprised by this. I felt like I was kind of stepping out on a limb, and I'm really glad that I've decided to read it because I think it does mean that I'm going to watch out for Ava Reid in the future, which is really exciting. I'm now only on page 50 in Letters to Milena, but oh my gosh, y'all. I mean, I just want to take root in this man's mind and live there. Because he literally said to her, she apparently complained to him that he's just a stranger, stationary, which has been written on, that she's giving all of her secrets to. And so he says, in any case, it must be sad to sit there alone on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, opposite a stranger, whose face is nothing but stationary, which has been written on. I am so much better off. Although my own room is small, the true Milena is here, the one who ran away from you on Sunday, and believe me, being with her is wonderful. So it's almost like the letters have transported her there. He's really, really romantic. And at first, I really thought he's coming on too strong, and she's apparently asked to meet him, and he said, no, you'll be really disappointed when you meet me. I'm actually not that great. And I thought, that's probably true, girl. You know, it probably is objectively true. And I kind of wonder what her perspective is on some of this, because to me, he's coming on really strong and he acts as if he knows a lot of intimate details about her when supposedly you would think they are supposed to only have a professional relationship. But again, given that we don't have her side of things, we just have kind of what he has quoted in his own letters. It does seem to me like she opened up to him relatively quickly. So I just think it's really interesting. It's really romantic. And it's certainly going to take me a long time to finish, but that's okay. I just am obsessed with it. And I'm really kind of obsessed with Franz Kafka. He's a brilliant mind. Like, if this is the way you're writing casual letters to the woman that you love, like, your literature must be something else. So this may be what I carry on with tonight, but I am also a good ways into The Princess in the Tower. And I have a few more things to say. I really don't want to just sit here and talk to y'all for 45 minutes straight about The Princess in the Tower, though I could, and I kind of want to. But this is a really interesting book, and the argument is getting more interesting as chapters go by, and I think I'm kind of figuring out exactly what she's going for, because she definitely, definitely, she wants you to think that the princess got away. And maybe specifically that Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the princes, is one who got away. Because we're at a point now where she's saying, well, people will talk about Edward V, the older boy, but no mention is ever made of the younger brother. Even when people accuse Richard of having them killed, it's almost always talked about as Richard killed Edward V, not as he killed Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. And so I think she really is going to go for Perkin Warbeck. I think she's going to say that Perkin Warbeck is really Richard, Duke of York. And you know what? That is so much fun to me, but that's also what Philippa Gregory did, okay? That is the base and the plot line of the entire White Queen or Cousins War series, is that Richard, Duke of York got out. Now, it's never confirmed in that series whether Perkin Warbeck actually is him or not, which is kind of the fun thing about it. But to me, a theory that you've first seen in fiction, seeing that kind of purported as real in historical reality, is so interesting, because I feel like before Philippa Gregory, I had never heard this before. I do think it's something that a lot of people think within the Richard III Society, that the boys were killed, but Richard was swapped out. And that's always been, I think, a theory that one or both of the boys were swapped out. And yet it still means that somebody wanted to kill them, that somebody did kill them. So that doesn't address the mystery part of it. But I kind of think that's where she's going. And I have not yet watched the program, and I'm not going to until I finish reading this book, which I think is going to give me far more information. And I am being skeptical, not because I want her to be wrong, not at all, I really don't, but it's because I know how this goes, and I know how things with Richard go. And so I'm not going to get my hopes up, but I feel like if anybody can do it, Philippa Langley is going to be the person who will solve this mystery. Something I would really love to know is the perception of her book currently among other historians, because though Philippa Langley is a historian, she technically was never formally trained. She didn't really come to the Richard III Society or discovering Richard's body or anything like that. She didn't come to it with a history background or an MBA background at all. So I feel like she's always been looked down upon in certain circles because she doesn't have those technical qualifications that a lot of people are looking for. Still, she's the one who found his body, so she does get a lot of respect and a lot of leeway, I think, there. But it does make me skeptical of some of her work. And there are some people that she's working with for this book who are clearly like forensic investigators or police investigators of the modern day, and you have to kind of wonder about that too, in my opinion, and the relevance of that, quite frankly. I feel like it's interesting to structure the book like we are solving a missing persons case, because that's kind of what we're really doing, but we're having to work with information that no modern police force would ever address or would ever find admissible in court, honestly. And she's straight up about that. She's straight up about the fact that she's going to look at gossip and she's going to analyze rumor and talk about that at length. And I feel like she has to, because that's a lot of what we have remaining. And we also have sources from later time periods that you also have to kind of call into question. So I feel like there's a lot going on here that's really fascinating. I'm curious to move forward with it, but I do think she definitely wants a certain outcome, and that was what made me wary about this in the first place when I heard about this. It's one thing to go in just because you're curious, just because you want to find out what happened. It's another to try to solve something when you have an outcome that you want to be true, whether you want Richard to have done it or you think he's innocent. If you go in assuming that what you think is going to be proven right, I think that puts you at a disadvantage when you're talking about certain sources, because you're going to read them the way that you want to read them. And so anything that is said against Richard, that is said directly against Richard killed his nephews in this year. We see this somewhere, I think in Poland, somebody wrote this down. She says, oh, well, this guy who wrote this was once a seafarer. And it's speculated that by this point in time, he actually hadn't been at sea in years. So he's probably dealing with really outdated information. So that's not true. And yet it's kind of interesting that somewhere as far afield as Poland has the conception that Richard did this. So somebody thinks it, and somebody thinks it close enough in time for it to be said within Richard's reign. I am going to try to be objective. I also don't really think Richard did it. And I think if he did, he didn't want to. The biggest thing for me, and the thing that has really turned me towards this in a positive way, is that she says the death of Hastings was within his rights as like Lord Constable. I think that is really, really remarkable, because that's the point where I get frustrated, and that's where I question things, because Hastings, by all accounts, was a really good dude who'd kind of been looking out for Richard. And so I think that's really interesting. Like I said earlier, the things that I have learned from this have been really interesting tidbits, but I don't feel like anything earth-shattering has happened. And I know that some of what she has found are documents pertaining to Perkin Warbeck. I feel like that's got to be what she found. And I'll be honest, I really don't see how you can take those with any kind of certainty either, because of course people believed he was who he says he was, or they pretended to believe it because they didn't like whoever was on the throne of England at the time. They didn't like Henry VII, or they had their own reasons for backing him. Maybe they did believe it, but that doesn't mean that's actually who he was. And I think that's kind of how she's gone into this. Now, she did say in the introduction she wanted to be open, and she had to be kind of calm about what she was going to find, because it might not be what she wanted to hear. But I still feel like she went into this with the outcome she wanted in mind, and she's writing this book to prove it. And I feel like if she'd found anything that proved Richard did it, she wouldn't have written this book. That's my honest opinion. I really don't think anybody in the Richard III Society would have written a book confirming he did anything. So this has to be a positive outcome for Richard. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm enjoying it. It's really interesting, but it's really dense. If you're not really into Richard, and if you're not really into the princes in this mystery at all, this is going to throw you for a loop. And there's a lot of kind of technical language and jargon around positions and offices that certain people held. And there's a lot of jumping around in the timeline too, which I don't think is particularly helpful, but I do think is interesting because it means each chapter kind of has a theme. So if you want to jump around, you can, but it does mean in some ways that you're clearly building on each previous chapter as you move on. I don't know. I feel on the one hand really positively about this, but on the other, I feel really, really skeptical of what she has found. So I will keep y'all updated. Well, I am going to wrap up the vlog here. I did not get anything finished, which I kind of expected. I feel like the week around the holidays is always really busy, and in many ways it's busier than what I expect it to be, and we don't even have as much going on as some people do. So I am towards the end of Juniper and Thorn, and this to me is just kind of forgettable. I feel like that's so harsh every time I say that about a book, but I do just genuinely feel like this book is not going to stick with me. And I think that means that I am less inclined to pick it back up. I always feel that way about books when I get to a certain point and I feel like I'm not going to give it 4 stars or 5 stars. And it's also not angering me enough for me to give it like 1 star. To me, that's actually worse. Reading something that you consider mediocre or forgettable, that to me is worse than reading a book that's objectively bad, because I think a lot of times when a book is bad, there's a lot to say about it. And to me, this is one I just feel like I don't have a lot to say because nothing is sticking out to me that positively, but also not really that negatively. She is an incredibly talented author. I think the prose is incredibly beautiful. I just love the way she writes. And I also really, in general, have to say that I think the world here is very interesting, but the story is one that I'm left scratching my head because I feel like there's a lot happening on the one hand, but on the other hand, I feel like the book is very, very slow and hasn't had a lot of plot progression. So I kind of think she wanted to throw in everything that she possibly could, and that makes sense, but it also means that a lot of these elements are not fully developed. And so sometimes I'm wondering, why did she even bother to include this if she wasn't going to give it the detail that it deserved? And so in some ways, I kind of want to say that I think the book should be longer. In others, I think the book is probably the perfect length for what it wants to do. At its heart, this is a fairy tale retelling, and I kind of like fairy tale retellings that cleave pretty closely to the vibe of a fairy tale or folk tale. And often in fairy tales, there's a lot that's left to the imagination. There's a lot that's not described. A lot of the action, in fact, the majority of the action often takes place off page. And so I'm trying to look at this book through that lens. And when I do, I think this is an enjoyable read. But I also feel like Tales of the Flower Bride, which came out earlier this year, tried to do something similar and did it far, far better, in my opinion. Leaving things murky, leaving things unexplained, that worked for me. But here I feel like we're being led to believe that we're going to get a bunch of answers and everything is going to clarify for us. And I really don't know at this point in time, 80% of the way through, that I'm going to get the answers that I want, or that the answers will be satisfactory is maybe more my issue. So this is a book that I'm still really enjoying. It's not the way that I felt about The Wolf and the Woodsman. That truly inspired a lot of negative emotion in me, and I really truly hated that book, and it got to the point that I hate read it. But A Study in Drowning blew me away. In every single way, it was just perfect to me. And I felt like thematically the book had a lot to say. And that's also true here. This is just kind of somewhere in the middle. And so maybe for me, her career is one that's just now really taking off, and I'm going to really enjoy what comes next. I'm still going to keep her as an author that I'm going to keep an eye out for in the future, but I don't want to say that she's going to be somebody that's an auto-buy author at all. Letters to Milena is still slow going. I expect that that will pop up in future vlogs, but The Princess in the Tower. I am almost towards the end of this, I would guess, and I know now some of what she has. I know some of the information that she has discovered. We've gotten kind of the background on some of the documents that have come out, and I'll be honest, it does look incredibly positive, possibly more positive than anything else has in recent years. And I'll say something that was really interesting to me is that she went over basically every mention of Richard kind of during Richard's reign, during Henry VII's reign, during the broader Tudor period, and then also post-Tudor period. And so she really looked at how things were discussed in terms of the princes in the Tower. And I was really interested and intrigued to find out that some of these sources mentioned Buckingham, who is, I'll confess it to y'all, he is my favored person for who killed the princes. I think Buckingham did it. What I am unsure of is if Buckingham did it of his own volition because he also wanted to be the king, or if he did it because Richard asked him to. And so that is what's always been murky to me, but I for sure think Buckingham was involved. I have always thought Buckingham was involved. And so I was interested to see that there were several sources from around the time period that mentioned Buckingham as a clear conspirator in the case. But there were also multiple sources where people believed the princes must have survived and gone on to the continent, gone across the ocean or something like that, and kind of went off to live regular, normal lives. And that to me seems kind of fairy tale and kind of wishful thinking. But at the same time, I want it to be true. I want it to have happened because that is so fairy tale. And I feel like things are so rarely like that in real life that the idea of Perkin Warbeck actually being Richard, Duke of York is really romantic and wonderful to think about. And I think that's why that's a more popular theory, because it seems like something relatively positive, although Perkin Warbeck was executed for this, so it's really not a great outcome for him. And so you do wonder when you think about the imposters, and I'm just now in the chapters where she's going into Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck in some detail, and so you have to wonder about somebody like Perkin Warbeck. Lambert Simnel was very, very young. He's basically a child, and so you can say he's being manipulated by everyone around him, adults around him who want something from him. To a certain extent, Perkin Warbeck is also young, but he's an adult. And I just kind of think at some point, if I was doing a charade, like a long-term charade, where I thought I was going to get money and riches out of this and I was going to become the Queen of England, I just don't know that I could carry through with it knowing that I would never be able to prove that I was who I said I was. And if I can't prove that, then they're definitely going to have me executed. So when you do think about it through that lens, what does he stand to gain? Because sometimes Perkin Warbeck is discussed in a very interesting light where he doesn't necessarily want the throne. He just kind of wants to be recognized. But at other times, that's absolutely what he wants. He just knows how to play kind of the political game, or the Game of Thrones, if you will, and he knows how to get really powerful people to back him. He doesn't necessarily have to do it on the battlefield. So I see what she's going for, and the sources that she has discovered are basically in favor of Perkin Warbeck, which is what I suspected. And as I suspected, to me, they don't really clarify whether Perkin Warbeck actually was Richard, Duke of York at all. This just proves, to me anyway, that there were people who truly believed he was who he said he was. And I think it could possibly even be people who just had a vested interest in seeing a positive outcome for him. They don't even necessarily have to believe that he really is Perkin Warbeck, but these documents do seem genuine in their belief that he is who he says he is. But in my opinion, they don't necessarily clear Richard's name at all. And it also really, so far for me, and maybe there's something she discovered that I haven't gotten to yet, it doesn't clarify anything that happened with Edward V. And so that to me is still up in the air. When I finish this, I feel like I'm going to have a lot of opinions, but I've already seen some reviews of this come out, and it's really interesting to see what people are saying, because on the one hand, people from the Richard III Society, people pro-Richard, are taking this as clearly they are saying he's innocent now, and we could all say he's innocent because this is all we needed. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who are like me and are kind of saying we need to analyze this a little bit more. This looks good, but it doesn't confirm anything. And then you also have some people who just say this is meaningless. It's great that these documents were rediscovered and that they've been translated and all that, but they prove nothing, and they're also really not even useful. And I'm going to be interested to see more reviews come out about this one, because it is certainly something that is very, very contentious, and I think is involving a lot of people with a lot of passion involved. I don't feel like this is a topic that you can discuss rationally. I feel like everybody goes into this with their own biases and with what they want to have happened. And I certainly think Philippa Langley went into this wanting to believe that Richard was innocent. And that has certainly been a component of a lot of the reviews. At any rate, it has been fun. It has just been a delight from start to finish. We got to go through all of the people that everyone thinks did it, all of the suspects. We got to go through the lives of the princes. It really was a bit like solving a murder mystery, which I think is an interesting format for a nonfiction, and also meant that it read really well. But this is kind of in the vein of a lot of modern nonfiction, in my opinion, where things are split into different chapters so that you can kind of jump around. I almost feel like there's a lot of historical nonfiction nowadays that is not intended to be read straight through, like cover to cover. I think it's designed for people to jump around, and that's probably really great, especially for people who were students. I kind of think this book fell under that umbrella. I don't know that that necessarily worked here, because it meant that we retread old ground multiple times. Sometimes things were explained in detail long after they had been mentioned the first time around, which I actually just don't think is all that useful, but I'm still just really enjoying it. It's a lot of fun. I just love this time period. So I hope you enjoyed this vlog. Thank you for spending time with me. I would love to know what you're currently reading, if you have read any of the books that I have mentioned today, but that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.